say it again, you've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked. Bamboozled. Led astray. Run amok. This is what he does. I'm going to tell you like it really is.
Welcome, everyone, back to another edition of Let's Take Five, the podcast where we look at one of the greats of cinema and discuss their excellence and range. My name is Eric Martindale.
My name is Austin Luger.
And today we are recording on Skype because we are away from each other. Austin is out of town, so we're going to do our best, so we apologize for the audio quality in advance. But we're continuing on with our Spike Lee Five. The previous film we covered on this Five was Do the Right Thing. We are on the second movie, which is Mo Better Blues, and we will then cover Malcolm X, 25th Hour, and we'll wrap up with new to theaters, BlackkKlansman, which is a first for this podcast. I think Logan was out of theaters by the time we covered that one.
It was.
It was. Okay, I knew it was very, very close. Regardless, so let's talk about Mo Better Blues. It's the 1990 film by Spike Lee. It stars Denzel Washington as Bleak Gillum. It also stars Spike Lee as Giant. Wesley Snipes is also in this movie. Giancarlo Esposito from Breaking Bad. And it basically follows the line of this incredibly talented musician who is a blues musician, specifically blues and jazz musician named Bleak, who is played by Denzel Washington. We see him in various stages of his life. We first see him as sort of this young Mozart not being able to go out with his friends and play because he has to complete his lesson. Then we see him as Denzel Washington, who's now an adult playing in the clubs. And we also see him caught in a love triangle with two different women while also balancing his career with his personal life, I guess you would say. Eventually, Bleak undergoes a physical alteration to his face, which makes him unable to play the way he used to. And then he has to live life as on the other side of being a great trumpet player. Am I correct so far in saying that? It's been a few weeks.
Absolutely. No, that is right. And this is a movie that Spike Lee made directly after Do the Right Thing. It is a film that is just about 1 or 2 years later. It has so much of the same cast, but it never feels like him just doing Do the Right Thing again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
It's a new story. It still has his control of like color and the sets in a way that I felt he had during Do the Right Thing. But to me, I wanted to kind of put this one in the 5, even though it's not like maybe his 5th best film ever made. But it shows like he has so much more to say than just like wanting to repeat Do the Right Thing over and over again. This is a really interesting film about artists in a way that I appreciate because so many movies and books and such always try to romanticize the artist because it is a tale being told by an artist. And I do like it when there is a sharper mirror looking back. And having Denzel Washington play this trumpet player who is, undeniably good at playing the trumpet, but he's also an incredibly selfish person. And I think the film does a really cool job of exploring whether that selfishness is worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where you get to a certain level where you feel like, and it's probably just a white people thing, where it's like if Spike Lee's doing a film, it has to have something to do with race in it. But I really didn't feel that vibe in this film, at least not to certainly the degree that Do the Right Thing, which is essentially what that film is about. This film, I didn't have that with it, and I think it's kind of interesting because I feel like that's the thing people immediately point out about Spike Lee, and I wonder if that's just a white people thing. Do you ever think that at all?
I think ultimately, and obviously I'm not the best person to speak on this, but yeah. I think there are Spike Lee films that directly address race head on, but I think ultimately any film of his is always going to have race as an element of it. And this one, especially when you're looking at him as a kid, the way that his parents were describing, like, no, you can't play outside, no, this is the trumpet, like, it isn't just like, it reminded me so much of those scenes in sports movies of like, no, you have to keep practicing football because like this is your way out. Mm-hmm. And nothing about like his young life seemed like necessarily tragic, but like this was always seen as like, this is a vessel for success if you put the work into it.
Of course, yes. And I have a tendency to get a little weirded out when I hear white people constantly saying a film is about race just because they're black people that are the main characters.
Sure, I understand.
That makes me a little uncomfortable when people do that. Otherwise, again, yeah, it's about a very, very selfish, unlikable guy who can play the trumpet really well. And we see this staged in these beautiful set pieces where we watch the whole band performing on stage. And there's this sort of rivalry going on between Wesley Snipes, who is the rival saxophone player, who is as good or better at playing the saxophone as he is at playing the trumpet. And you get sort of this weird vibe. And Spike Lee does this brilliantly because he uses his own character to set up the first time we're introduced to the band as saying, this guy's upstaging you. He needs to learn that it's not his band. And then we actually get to see that play out live in this beautiful proscenium where the band's playing on stage and they sound great. And then Denzel gets on the trumpet and he sounds incredible. And then you actually get to see Wesley Snipes' character come out and start playing the saxophone, and that sounds incredible too. And you actually get to see the rivalry played out in front of you. And I doubt they were really playing, but they look so realistic that the scene is so awesome. It actually reminded me of shots that Kurosawa would do and how he would tell you a thing and introduce you to the shot that's going to have 2 or 3 main characters in it, surrounded by a swath of extras that are all doing something that are engaging you into the action. And I just thought that was really, really effective way to kick off the film, right?
And there's such a cool stylistic thing that he did as well, because not only when you look at the rivalry part, when he introduces the entire band, which includes, again, some more alums from Do the Right Thing, including Bill Nunn, he has like a crane shot. Like, it starts up so high and then like swoops down to see each one of them. Each one of them gets like a very like grand entrance as they're each being named off. And it's such a cool, like, it's once again Spike Lee being this like stylish director. And it never feels like a cheap shot of like, he has a lot of really cool experimental shots in this movie that should be problematic in my mind, especially like, one of my favorite shots in the movie is, because I typically really hate 360 shots, but there's a shot early on in the movie when Denzel Washington is practicing the trumpet, and you just kind of he stays staring at the camera, and he's clearly spinning with the camera as you kind of see his entire apartment, but he has just like the most like concentrated look as he's just focusing on like every single note and every single breath.
Well, part of that is because Denzel Washington's a really good actor, and he's able to sell that shot, right? Yeah. So you like have that, and it seems like a cliche now to call Denzel Washington a great actor, but point in fact, in this movie, and then when we get to Malcolm X, even more so. And I know, I mean, when did Glory come out?
Late 80s.
So late 80s. So at this point, he'd already won an Academy Award.
He did. He basically got his big start. He did some stage, but it was St. Elsewhere that kind of put him on the national part. That's not like a very juicy part in that hospital show, but Glory and then these collaborations with Spike Lee, thrust him as... There's a podcast I really loved that's, unfortunately, it's over now, but it was called Denzel Washington's the Greatest Actor of All Time, period. And it just went through all of his films, and listening to that show and rewatching his films, he's one of the best alive.
And there's a great thing because Spike Lee is, and I want to get back to that initial camera shot that we were talking about, but Spike Lee, what I don't know if this goes underappreciated with him or not. I'm not as familiar of the criticisms written on Spike Lee. Typically, when I like someone, I'm reading a lot of what other people think about them, and other people writing about their films. But he gets so much out of his actors too.
Oh yeah.
There is it's apparent in the camera shots that we saw earlier in the film, and that this huge sweeping shots of this beautiful building, this beautiful proscenium with this beautiful music in it, and then later when the characters are actually talking to each other in this really cramped, sort of shitty dressing room, this green room dressing room that is the exact opposite of the luxurious place that you saw outside. And having been in some of these rooms and some of these situations where I've been performing, I can vouch for the verisimilitude of that and the conversations that the people are having about being late and not being there on time. So this is very much it's definitely driven by Bleak Gillam's character, but there's very much a whole effort being done by a huge cast of characters that make up this film. It's almost in a way the characterization in this film is actually probably better than the film. It stands out significantly because the dialogue's okay, but the characters are so real when they're saying it. It engages me more than I feel like the film was worth overall, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I ended up having favorite members of the band, stuff like that.
Well, it's funny because when I was watching this, I was so impressed by the entire cast. And I kind of thought two things. One, I would definitely watch a TV show if this was like them. Like they made this like a weekly AMC drama with Spike Lee making it. I would watch the hell out of this. And I was just so impressed because I know I keep mentioning the actors who are in Do the Right Thing, but it did remind me of like when Orson Welles had his troupe. What were they called again? The Mercury Theater.
Yeah, Mercury Theater.
And just the fact that like he enjoys so much as talent that he gives something new. Like even John Turturro, who we talked a lot about last week in Do the Right Thing.
I know. I love John Turturro.
He has like 2 scenes in this, and it could very easily be like the same role because he is a very like rockin' your shoe antagonist kind of character where he's just kind of denying them the money. But it's not him playing a pizzeria guy on the verge of exploding. This is a very pleasant man who is just not going to pay them. And he's so funny in those scenes where it's just like the two of them like looking at the books going, no, I mean, you
signed a contract.
Yeah,
yeah. You signed a contract.
Everyone that gets to be new is what I'm saying. Like it's so good.
Those scenes in particular I think are really interesting because they really get at the heart of what the movie is about. I mean, you have the love triangle that's going on, which we can get into a little bit more, but you also have this other proponent of the film, which is Spike Lee playing Giant, which is obviously an ironic nickname because he's so small. But he is the agent for the band, but he is not doing a very good job, at least by the other band members' standards. So you actually have these scenes where Denzel Washington as Bleak Gillum, rather than having just fire Giant for being a bad manager, he takes it upon himself to sort of manage the band by himself. And in this, we are given insight to Bleak's one sort of weakness is his faith and the trust that he puts in Giant, right? Like, he seems to have everything in his life very compartmentalized and very organized, and he seems to be getting the maximum amount of what Bleak wants out of each situation, except for the management situation. Because that is, why doesn't Bleak just fire him?
Yeah, it's a number of things. I'm fascinated by...
I mean, he's so selfish in every other aspect.
Yes.
This one thing is it ends up leading us down the road that eventually is what disfigures his face.
Well, I think it's a number of things. One, I think it is actually clear in the movie that Giant is his only friend. And he has lots of coworkers, and he has lots of, he has 2 women he's sleeping with at the moment. But he almost sees those all as, like, accessories or means to an end.
Right.
It seems to be Giant is the only one he actually just enjoys being with for the sake of company. And that is something that kind of goes against his very, like, selfish, only do things for, like, the goal. And I think that is what makes him a bit biased. But there's something about the two of them that I really ended up liking. And then Wesley Snipes as a third kind of different...
Actually, I like Wesley Snipes quite a bit.
Because he should be the antagonist, but the more you realize that Bleak is a dick.
Exactly.
Wesley Snipes' character is so much better at the work-life balance, to use the overused phrase. Because I really liked how, like, Denzel Washington, his character is all about the idea of, you can create your own fate. I'm going to be the best because I'm going to work every single second. I'm going to use this for this. This needs to be this way. He's a manager of his own fate. Whereas Spike Lee's Giant character is someone who is entirely like, he is in fate's hands in a different kind of way. Like, he is a major gambling problem. And it's not like he is like a smart gambler. Like, he's so good at like cards. No, he's going to a bookie. He's putting a bet on every single NFL game or every single baseball game. And
he loses all.
He loses them all. He is someone who kind of keeps assuming the world will work out for him, whereas Denzel tries to like create that world himself, and both end up failing.
Yes, they both do. I originally thought that Giant was in the film too much. I thought that Spike Lee was taking up too much screen time that I thought could have been better used in other areas. But I think I still thought that until I've re-gone through the canon. Now I'm watching Malcolm X, I'm rewatching 25th Hour, and I'm beginning to understand Spike Lee a lot more as a director. And he is someone who always understands that we'll be more interested in a film if we know more about the characters surrounding the protagonist. But like, because 25th Hour, we'll get more to it when we get there, that's a very fine line because there are so many other characters in that film that take up so much screen time for themselves, but they never take so much to where it confuses us into who's actually driving this story.
Yeah.
You know, but it ends up being an enriching thing if you do it the just right amount. And I always felt like Spike Lee in this film was just crossing the line a little too much to where it seemed like it was becoming indulgent. And I don't know if that's simply because I know he's the director of the film.
I think it was there for, like, the contrast. Like, there's different ways these two are living their lives. I think that was an element there. The one person I wish I saw more of was Wesley Snipes' character. Because
Me too.
So early on, you kind of just dismiss him as, like, oh, he's going to be the rival musician. Mm-hmm. But the more, like, especially when he
meets Clark and starts talking to Clark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And because you see, like, oh, no, he's kind of moving on his girl. But every time this happens, you take a step back and go, wait, Denzel Washington's cheating on her already.
Yes, exactly.
This is all terrible. But it's kind of, it works to the film's benefit in a way because since the whole movie is really from Denzel's point of view, whereas Do the Right Thing wasn't. Do the Right Thing is like a very pure ensemble where, yes, Mookie is like the main guy, but you get so many scenes of everyone else bouncing around each other.
Again, though, but the movie never confuses us. We know that Mookie is driving that plot. Yeah. At times, the Venn diagram expanded a little too large, and I felt like Giant was bleeding over a little too much, whereas someone, not necessarily Bleak needed to be more. Because I felt like I spent adequate time with Bleak, but a character like the Wesley Snipes character, for sure. Or you could have further explored the relationships with other members of the band, but I think it would have been better used just on the Snipes character. But when you see Snipes with Clark, Cinda Williams is the actress's name, you see her with it, you're like, man, he's moving in on his girl, and then you think, yeah, exactly, you're right. I mean, he's cheating on her anyway. And then you start to get like, oh, he'd be better. She actually would be better off with him. And the reason you start to do that is because as the movie goes along, you end up seeing this rival, and you actually learn, he's actually a great musician that hasn't gotten, is still able to be a person, is still able to be a human. I mean, he proves that at the end of the film. When he actually tries to get Bleak to come back and play, he didn't have to do that.
And that wasn't malicious, because even though in that scene we watch Bleak fail because his lips messed up and he can't do it right, this was not a way like... This was not like the film Whiplash, which I get a lot about, which is a film that is very much about, can you only be a good musician if you kind of abandon all other aspects of your life and give it 200%, no matter how much that will cause you to bleed on your drums. Mm-hmm. And that is a film that's about a certain level of intensity, and the film... Whiplash is not definitive one way or the other, which is the best way to do it. Mo Better Blues to me is very clear. This is a poor way to live your life, and it almost is a good, like, especially as someone who's such a very clear and controlling of the frame director like Spike Lee is. It almost feels like a humbling film in many ways, especially his first film after his big colossal hit. It's so interesting to see him do that.
Yeah, I when I was watching the film, I thought, like, towards the end, I was like, I was worried it wasn't going to judge Bleak. That was my fear, because I thought it was trending that way. I don't necessarily always root for the protagonist of the film just because I'm supposed to. Mm-hmm. I mean, he does a lot of bad things in this film that at a certain point, I feel I got to a point where it's like, I need to see him pay for this. I need to see that happen. Like, I'm not... I remember, I think I texted you, like, I can't imagine the ending of this film. Mm-hmm. How can this end? Well, it's because Giant got in the desk with the wrong people, and he ends up beating him up, and he ends up getting his lip messed up, and then he can't play anymore. So it's this very humbling thing. I think the movie would have been better if it would have ended in the ring when he walks out of the club. And I know I'm this weird guy. People tell me all the time I root for the bad guys in the film. That's not true. I root for the best ending. And I thought at this point, I think it would have been a better film if it would have ended there, because then it works as sort of a morality tale. But what ends up happening is we see him lead the other side of his life. He gets married, he has a kid, and he ends up having a kid have to learn to play the instrument like he did. It's a like father, like son thing. And I have a feeling you liked that ending.
Well, here's the thing. So I rewatched this film because I watched it a few months ago for the first time. Thought this was awesome. Put it in the back of my mind like this could be a good Spike Lee 5 movie. And so I watched it again before this recording, and I ended up liking Spike Lee's Giant character more this viewing, as I kind of talked about. But I did like the aftermath a lot less on this view.
I'm not a fan of it, and here is why I'm not a fan of it. Is because the film judges him in every other aspect. We see him humiliated. We see him walk out of the club in the rain. And then when he goes back to Indigo, who is one of the girls he was cheating on, played by Joy Lee, I think is Spike Lee's sister, and she tells him, she takes him back. And that is what really bothered me. I would have thought if you were going to show that character again, her victory would be in telling Bleak, no, I mean, you missed your chance. You're just coming back because you can't play anymore. Because we never get the evidence. We never get the evidence that Bleak actually is humbled, or that he's just now doing these things and seeing the right way in his life just because he can't play the trumpet anymore.
I saw a lot of it. A lot of it was because of Denzel Washington's incredible performance. But yeah. I just thought that whole epilogue was probably 20 minutes, and it should have been 10.
Yeah, it should have been a lot. If it was going to be there, it should have been a lot less.
It should have just been the concert sequence with Wesley Snipes, which is very well staged and very well done.
It's so good. It's so good. It's my favorite scene in the movie.
And I really actually did enjoy the whole, bookend him with the kid kind of thing. Because, I mean, it's a bit on the nose, but I think it still works really well. Like, when he was a kid, and you had, no, you can't play with your friends, work on the trumpet, and there is, part of it because the two actors sell it so well, you have Indigo say, hey, no, focus on this. This is, responsible parenting.
You have a really good child actor, too.
Really good child actor, and you have Denzel Washington really kind of underplay, he feels quasi-aware this happened before. It's not a very, aha moment, but it is him having, learned the lessons of the film, and then saying, no, you can play with your friends first. And
then I would have liked the transition for it being in the rain, they're out there in the rain, and then you just cut to that scene.
I agree. And also just thinking now about those bookend scenes, I think every once in a while, looking through these films, Spike Lee likes to reference his own films in just the filmmaking ways. He doesn't repeat a shot, but he almost pays homage to his own shots, which I enjoy. And the one he did in this film is at the beginning when the kids want him to play and the mom says no. They all throw up their hands.
Throw their arms, just do the right thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, too. The same shot from Do the Right Thing when that guy says, what's he say? And he says something about, I lived in Brooklyn for 2 years or something like that.
Yes, that's right. It was a guy coming in town saying, no, I'm part of this city. I know this city. I lived here. And they all throw up their hands going, no.
Yeah. No, it was. And I recognized the same thing when it happened. So it's funny that you said that, too, because I thought the same exact thing.
And I have absolutely no transition to this, but something I wanted to bring up, because it's something that I've noticed now with Do the Right Thing with this, that I think no one really talks about Spike Lee, is that he knows how to make really sexy movies.
Yeah?
Elaborate. He captures, other people
sex?
kind of go, there is a sensuality and a heat in those scenes, and it's not for, always cheap titillation of nudity or whatever. It is letting the actors be physically close to each other, faces and such, and getting the right mood. That he is one of the best directors at depicting that he makes really sexy scenes without being a sex movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I thought immediately of, how could you not, the Do the Right Thing nipple scene with the ice cube, where these things are kind of awkward, but he commits to them, and some of the actors commit to them in such a way that, yeah, you're right. I do feel that way as well. You don't see anything like that in Malcolm X because it would have been weird in there.
No, that would not fit in that movie.
But 25th Hour has a little bit of that sexuality in the Rosario Dawson character and the Anna Paquin character as well, when they're around the other men. If you can make just a brief moment between Anna Paquin and Philip Seymour Hoffman kind of sexy, yeah, you have some sort of talent.
That's true. That's how he started his career, too, because the first movie he made, She's Gotta Have It, is about a young woman in New York who has a couple of different guys, and she's not ashamed of that. And that's what the Netflix TV show, which is the adaptation of it, is doing as well. And he knows how to film it in a way that everyone is okay. Like no one is being like exploited. It is showing adults having
things.
And it weirdly works with the character thing too, because you think about like how terrible Denzel Washington is to these people and whatnot. Like there's a reason they keep coming back to him. In a way, it's not because of his personality and attention. In fact, they kind of keep saying like you have like these aspects to you, but you're not focused on anyone else but yourself. Which I think why I do end up liking the ending a bit more, because once he stops being so demanding of this is the only way I can live, and he now like acknowledges other people within his sphere.
But that's not why it happens though, Austin. It happens because he doesn't have a choice.
Yes.
If he makes a choice or a transition and a pivot of his own volition, then I would agree. But the fact of the matter is there's no way to tell if he's actually been humbled or he's just living this life now because he can't play the trumpet anymore.
I like to believe it's both. I don't think he would have got there on his own, but having it taken away from him.
Transition. I never saw it. I almost think it would have been better not to see it. Like just have the scene there at the end and then transition to later, like we were saying earlier. Mm-hmm. That way I never have to go through the motion of whether or not I actually believe him or not.
Yeah.
Because I would have just assumed he lived his life, he got there, he made up for it. I can use my own imagination. You know what I mean? Kind of like what you said, make the ending 10 minutes shorter. But anyway, just this one man's opinion. But that is the specific sticking point for me. It's the fact that he did get better, but he didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think the film acknowledges that he is not a saint. Like he is now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like it's using this like he just kind of kept getting worse, and this is the only way he would like ever get.
Well, I think Indigo literally says it when he goes back. I may be wrong. Like I said, it's been a few weeks, but when he goes back to her place after he confirms that he cannot play anymore, she says something to the effect of "You're only back here because you can't play."
Yeah,
you know. So it's better. The spotlight effect works really well. Might as well call it out and have a character actually say it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I'm just going to be thinking it, which is worse. And at least she put a voice to my feeling.
It's weird. This is a movie that, I mean, it is not. I don't love it as much as Do the Right Thing, and yet, like, I keep seeing like the obvious screenplay structural moments, like when he cuts his lip during sex, and that obviously foreshadows the ending, and the bookends are very on the nose. But something about Spike Lee's filmmaking that is just such a comfortable, well, like intended environment of a film. It's a complete movie. That it really doesn't bother me how on the nose the screenwriting beats are, because I just enjoy the evolution of it all.
Me too. I think we see a lot of the other stuff. Some of the same stuff that he uses in this film, not necessarily used more effectively in the other films, but are in better films that come later. You know, his use of lighting, like he uses in The Club, we see that later in 25th Hour. The way he sets up the stage, and you know, you have a clear middle ground, foreground, background, and all extras, you know, doing something but never pulling focus, like we see in, you know, Malcolm X. Just a variety of different tips and tricks, and the way you have characters in a room talking to each other in very, very realistic ways, having very, very realistic conversations, the type of thing that Quentin Tarantino gets credit for, but Spike Lee is actually doing better, in my opinion.
I actually agree. Yeah,
you see here in this film, you see all in Do the Right Thing. You won't see it in Malcolm X as much, but it is there simply because Malcolm X is more grandiose. We're talking about Malcolm X. We're talking about someone who lived a completely different life than the characters of 25th Hour. But you have those characters in a room having conversations that seem very, very realistic, conversations that 30-year-olds would have. And you have great actors actually breathing, you know, life into those words that makes a huge, huge difference. I know. I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman is always going to be great at playing a lowlife. Mm-hmm. You know, that's just, he's going to be great at that. So you put that in 25th Hour and voila, you know, you actually have these characters, but he's great he's putting them in the situations. I mean, he was smart enough to do that, and he's great enough. I mean, some of these shots, some of the way the characters move, everything has, and I mentioned earlier, such a sincere verisimilitude to it that's what makes him a great director. It's not in a film like Mo Better Blues is a film that I think is, you know, pretty good, and we're having a conversation about it that's very impassioned to me because in between the lines, I see how great he is. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned Tarantino. I thought about him as well, and it's more next week's film, Malcolm X. He's also doing a lot of like what Scorsese's doing at this time, equally as good. Like, there is some like Goodfellas elements of Malcolm X, and they came out basically at the same time.
Oh, I know. It's funny. Yeah, I thought the same thing. I was thinking the same exact thing. I mean, specifically with the cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that is Mo Better Blues. We recommend you check it out, especially when you're looking at the larger Spike Lee canon. We'll be back next week with a review of his masterpiece, perhaps, Malcolm X. Until then, you can go to theartimmortal.com, check out all past episodes of Let's Take 5. While you're there, check out some other podcasts that we do, including The Immortals. This week we covered a small film called The Godfather, and Werner Herzog documentary Little Dieter Needs to Fly. We covered Werner Herzog many months ago here on Let's Take 5, and this is another fun documentary of his.
And we covered Godfather 2 on the second episode? First episode?
I think the very first episode, Let's Take 5, because it was our De Niro 5.
There we go.
Also, go check out Ad Absurdum, the legal podcast where two lawyers talk about the real-life legal implications of pop culture. I know right now they're scheduling their next episode, so you should get excited and catch up with their old ones. And until then, follow us on Twitter at The Immortals Pod. Please leave a review for us on iTunes so people can find our show. And special thanks to Adam Lord, who continues to be brilliant with all of his fantastic intros for this show. And Eric, where can we find you?
Constant Aversion's my YouTube channel. Check me out on there.
Fantastic. And we'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Austin Luker.
I'm Eric Martindale.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Clark, what time is it?
1 o'clock p.m.
And what does that mean?
That means you're practicing.
That's right. It means I'm practicing. And if you know I'm practicing, and you know I don't finish practicing until 2 o'clock, which is for at least another 60 minutes, why are you buzzing my buzzer?
Because I want to see you.
What? What is that supposed to mean?
That means let me up.
And who are you?
I'm Clark.